From its inception, the Ignaz Florio Cooperative was immediately successful. The company's president was Antonio Milone. Milone was a Corleonese and a close ally of Lupo's in Little Italy. Morello was listed as treasurer, and 4 other directors, all prominent figures in the Sicilian community, rounded out the board. Lupo was kept off any paperwork at his own insistence. Shares in the company were offered at $2 and $5. There was no need to coerce anybody into buying stock. The community's grudging respect for Lupo and Morello's business sense was sufficient to convince several hundred small investors. Most of the cooperative properties were built in the outer reaches of the city where land could still be purchased cheaply. The plan was to erect 2 rows of Italian tenements in 137th Street, 138th Street, and Cypress Avenue in the Bronx. These properties were completed in 1906. There were several other projects also. The cooperative purchased lots on 80th Street, 109th Street, and Beach Avenue. The largest of its developments was a row of tenements built on 140th Street. The buildings constructed by the association were sold as they were finished. Neither Morello nor Lupo had any interest in becoming a landlord. This early move into construction by the Mafia foreshadowed what was to be one of their most lucrative rackets in the future. With more immigrants settling in the city, Morello began thinking about growing the borgata. In that line of thinking, he called a meeting between his capos. Once at the meeting, Morello was the first to speak. "We have many trustworthy men who toil with us in the streets every day. Is it not time that the best of those take the oath?" Morello's half-brother Niccolo jumped in. "There is more opportunity now than ever, but also more risk. Wouldn't it be prudent to spread both around?" he said with a flourish. Lupo bluntly added, "I need more men. I cannot do all the work myself," he said with a huff. So with no dissent, it was decided to initiate new members. Weeks later, with everything arranged, Morello, his brothers, Lupo, and others from the family assembled in the basement of a tenement building owned by the family. Today, they were admitting 5 new members. They had not told the inductees the purpose of this meeting, and so 4 of the 5 squirmed and fidgeted as they waited for whatever came next. The only one of the 5 with a seemingly relaxed demeanor was the most promising of these young recruits. The cool customer was a kid by the name of Giuseppe Massaria. A Sicilian immigrant from western Sicily, Massaria arrived in Manhattan in 1900. He began his criminal career as a professional burglar, where he came to the attention of Ignazio Lupo. Massaria led a small group of thugs who specialized in burglary. In 1907, at 21 years old, Massaria received a suspended sentence after breaking into an apartment on Elizabeth Street. He earned Lupo's trust when he threatened his own family on Lupo's orders due to an unpaid debt. He had proven his worth with a gun as well, and now here he was, about to join their brotherhood. "Give me your hand," Morello said quietly. Joe Massaria did as he was bid. Then his finger was pricked, blood was smeared on the card of a saint, and Morello continued, "May your soul burn like this saint if you ever betray this brotherhood." As Morello finished, the saint was burned in Massaria's hands. The ceremony then finished, and drinks and cigars were passed around. The Depression of 1907 destroyed the American economy more completely than any financial panic since the slump of 1893. The Ignaz Florio Cooperative was hit hard as well. This crisis spread rapidly thanks largely to poor planning by most large companies, and by the late summer, share prices were falling more sharply than they had ever done before. As stock tumbled, financial houses all along Wall Street found themselves with insufficient assets to cover their exposure, and one by one, they failed. So severe was the financial shock generated by this disaster that its effects whipsawed around the globe. Thanks in part to the guidance of a financial titan named J.P. Morgan, the worst of the panic had run its course by October of 1907. But even Morgan, at the height of his powers, could not stop the financial crisis from turning New York into a mess. New York's immigrant communities were among the most affected by the deepening crisis. 25 banks failed in Little Italy alone. Their collapse cost thousands of customers their life savings. Hundreds of small businesses went bankrupt. Only those that were well established, well run, and well managed would survive the onslaught. The Ignaz Florio Cooperative was not one of those well run businesses, and it felt the full force of the recession. The price of land and property both plummeted, exposing Lupo and Morello to large losses on several projects, and by the summer of 1908, the association had exhausted its remaining funds and began to default on its obligations. The recession hit other areas of their business empire also, and among the most prominent casualties was Lupo's chain of grocery stores. Fewer and fewer Italians could afford Lupo's high prices, and the Wolf had also acquired the habit of draining his business of capital in order to fund his extravagant lifestyle. With economic conditions getting worse in the fall of 1908, even the original Mott Street store was teetering on the brink of insolvency. At the time, Lupo's property portfolio was worth about $110,000. The Wolf, however, had mortgages totaling $72,000 and had just remortgaged for a further $13,000. By the time auditors arrived at Mott Street to scavenge the remains, the entire chain of stores had assets including stock of only $1,500 and debts in excess of $100,000. The need for funds became pressing. When Ignazio Lupo vanished from New York, hotly pursued by his creditors, he took one last opportunity to steal from them by ordering $50,000 of groceries on credit and having the goods shipped to a dockside warehouse in Hoboken, New Jersey, from which they were to have been sent to Sicily for sale by an old associate in Palermo. However, due to the dogged determination of Petrosino, the squad was able to follow the paper trail, track down the missing consignments, and have them impounded, closing off another illicit channel of cash. In an effort to raise emergency funds, Lupo stepped up his extortion racket, including robbing and beating one man nearly to death in his store. Shortly after, the Wolf received a highly public visit from Joe Petrosino. The police had received word that Lupo was once again back up to his old tricks and had begun extorting local businesses. Walking up to Lupo in uniform, Petrosino was not sure what he was going to do until it happened. On approach, Lupo's swagger helped Petrosino's decision-making process. Without warning, Petrosino struck Lupo hard in the chin, dropping him to the pavement. Rapidly changing from Italian to Brooklynese, Petrosino yelled at the top of his lungs, "You think you're a tough guy? You got nothing! Ugats! Nothing!" The fight ended with Lupo unconscious on the ground. It was a story destined to grow wings, and the Wolf's already dangerous temper was not improved by the exaggerated versions of events that soon began to circulate. The worst of these embellishments had the detective dumping Lupo's beaten and unconscious body in a barrel in the middle of the street. For his part, Lupo's hatred for Petrosino grew exponentially. Only the strictest order from Morello prevented Lupo from making an attempt on Petrosino's life. If Petrosino had any fear at all of the Mafia, he didn't show it. Petrosino and his men kept the pressure on. On November 15, 1908, the Italian squad raided a small Brooklyn apartment which was being used as a makeshift bomb factory. Over the next 3 months, the squad was called to investigate 8 bombings, several dozen Black Hand extortion attempts, and over a dozen gang-related murders. Despite winning various battles, it felt like they were losing the war. The murder rate was up, bombings were up, property crime was up, and so were the number of threats being made by the Black Hand. The gangs of New York were increasingly becoming more organized and efficient, and the Morello crime family was at the forefront. This increase in sophistication continued to make policing more and more difficult, and despite the recent downturn in construction, the family's other rackets seemed to be humming along nicely. Joe Petrosino was slowly realizing he now had a public profile. At one time, he could put on a disguise and mingle with criminals in Little Italy or East Harlem. Now he was recognized halfway down the street. Petrosino's name literally means parsley in Italian, so whenever he heard a vendor yell, "Fresh parsley here, parsley for sale," he knew he had been spotted. His new notoriety also made him a target for up-and-coming mafiosos. Still, criminals of all stripes feared and respected him. His beating of Lupo gave him an aura of invincibility in the neighborhood. He also knew that to maintain this aura was akin to his continued breathing, so he did not discourage it. Still, the problem of convicting these criminals remained. Petrosino became convinced the only way to win this war was to see every Sicilian criminal return to the old country. During all this, Petrosino decided to complicate his life further by getting married and having a daughter. Further upheaval was caused when crime crusader Theodore Bingham replaced McAdoo as police commissioner. Shortly after taking command, Bingham called for a meeting with Petrosino. The two met in Bingham's office just 2 days later. "Good morning, Lieutenant," Bingham boomed. Before he was police commissioner Bingham, he was General Bingham serving with the Army Corps of Engineers. He came to New York after a long posting in Washington and had a reputation for getting things done. It was this military bearing that Petrosino first noticed. It was his next statement that would most surprise Petrosino. "I would like you to go to Italy. In order to combat these Black Hand gangs, we need to improve our intelligence. We have 2,000 known criminals with no background information. We need to know what the police in Italy know. We also need to open up lines of communication and cooperation between law enforcement in the United States and law enforcement in Italy. Would you accept this mission, Lieutenant Petrosino?" Bingham asked vehemently. "With all due respect, Commissioner Bingham, I have just been married and have a young daughter. Couldn't there be someone better suited for this mission?" Petrosino responded. "Lieutenant Petrosino, please. There is no one better suited than you," Bingham replied, keeping the pressure on. This back and forth continued for another 10 minutes until Petrosino finally gave in. Petrosino knew he was not a good fit for this mission. He was an investigator, not a diplomat. However, even he could understand Bingham's reasoning. Though not cursed with a big ego, even he could see he was now becoming the face of the fight against the Black Hand, and this newly found notoriety would make the mission at hand even more dangerous. And it was no longer just his own life he had to consider. All the many years of being married to the job had given way to a new life with his wife and young daughter. If he took this trip, there was a real chance he may never return. Where would that leave them? Nonetheless, he felt it was his duty to see these Italian criminals in prison. If not him, then who? Along with his wife and daughter, his oldest friend, Sergeant Vakris, went down to the pier to see him off. After hugging and kissing his family goodbye, he shared a few words with his old friend. "Jesus, can you believe this? 40 years and I'm going back?" Petrosino cackled. Vakris had known Petrosino for years and could tell despite his outward joviality, Petrosino was not happy about going to Italy. "Be careful, boss," Vakris said with a straight face. "A word over there can travel like the wind. So just be careful, huh?" He finishes, giving his old friend a hug. An hour later, the boat was leaving the harbor and Detective Petrosino was on it. The boat which Petrosino now boarded, named the Duca de Genova, afforded extravagant luxury for its first-class patrons. Due to the rather large budget afforded him by Bingham, this was how he traveled. His cover was that of a Jewish businessman named Simone Velletri. Petrosino would spend the early days of his voyage hidden away in his room. When he finally emerged, he told those that asked that he was returning home for care with a digestive malady. After doing his best to keep his identity under wraps, Petrosino finally arrived in Italy. Once there, he immediately caught the train to Rome. He arrived in Rome that evening and checked into the Hotel Inghilterra under a different alias. The next morning, Petrosino woke early and headed over to the American Embassy for a scheduled appointment with the American ambassador to Italy, Lloyd Griscom. Meanwhile, in East Harlem, Morello sat having an espresso when a young boy came running into Morello's restaurant. He recognized the kid as the son of a mob soldier that was used to relay messages between them. "Don Morello, Don Lupo asks that you read this," the boy stammers, clearly out of breath. Morello looks at the newspaper. Down in the corner, a small article is circled. The article is written in Italian. Giuseppe Morello begins to read. Once in Rome, Petrosino felt anonymous and much safer than he did on the boat. Things may have been different if he'd have known that the local Lardo Italiano newspaper was reporting on Petrosino's ongoing war against the Black Hand in New York and that he had plans to leave for Italy. While the article was hardly front-page news, it was noticed, and by the time he reached Rome, news of Petrosino's trip was in several Italian newspapers. The cat was out of the proverbial bag. Not only had Petrosino been identified by 2 Italian reporters, but he had thought he had recognized familiar men appearing over and over, making the wily old detective paranoid. When he thought he saw the same man for the 4th time, Petrosino flipped the detective switch and counter-surveilled the man at a distance. After a time, he was able to track his would-be spy to a local post office. From there, he determined that the telegram that went out was headed to Sicily. Knowing his next stop was in Palermo, but now in fear that his secret was truly out, Petrosino did not travel there on any passenger ship that shuttled up and down the Italian coast. Instead, he took the train to Naples, where he paid the captain of a mailboat to take him on board. The little steamer sailed south overnight, reaching Sicily the next morning, and the detective stepped ashore in a quiet corner of the Palermo docks at dawn on February 28th. He was convinced that his arrival had gone unnoticed. Feeling like he'd left his pursuers behind in Rome, Joe Petrosino started making mistakes. He opened a bank account in his own name and had begun to get comfortable with local waiters and shopkeepers, breaking character from time to time. During this time, he also worked hard, spending late nights in police stations and courthouses, copying down police and court records until the late hours of the evening. Petrosino's plan was to finish the mission and get home quickly, and for a while, it looked like that was what was going to happen. That was until the day of March 12th. Petrosino walked to Palermo's Piazza Marina like a man on a mission, which he was. He was here to meet a source of information on some of the men he was looking for information on back home. As he walked, something caught Petrosino's attention. He wasn't sure what it was, but soon alarm bells were going off in his head. But it was too late. 3 shots were fired, striking Petrosino each time. The 3rd and final shot was fatal, delivered directly into Petrosino's throat. Seconds after the shots rang out, the lights illuminating the square darkened as someone had cut the flow of gas to the lamps, making effective pursuit impossible. When the police searched Petrosino's wallet later on, they found a postcard with the message reading, "A kiss for you, my little girl, who has spent 3 months far from her daddy." From a farmhouse on the outskirts of Palermo, Vito Cassioferro sent a coded message from Sicily to Giuseppe Morello back in Italian Harlem. The message was a simple one. "Now we have cast this stone from our path," was all it said. Despite the feeling of relief, there was also a slight feeling of sadness as Cassioferro fell asleep that night. For Petrosino was a worthy adversary, and now he is gone.